The anti-U.S. rhetoric is being stirred up by Carney because his party
That's right.
devastated the country over the last 10 years. And the only way he can stay in power is to convince people he's the solution.
A liberal scandal so big, even CTV News had to address it. Kevin O'Leary also ripped into specifically Mark Carney and the liberals. And he did also comment a bit on Poilievre doing some similar things in regard to election manipulation and how people are just not seeing the full picture here. And that's very, very intentional, details of which we will get into. Funny enough, the Security Task Force gave an update earlier today about misinformation and disinformation, foreign interference in this election, and the advice that they gave to Canadians. It might make some people a little mad.
The questions are focused on what we're expecting social media platforms to do. But Al mentioned earlier that there are other think tanks and enterprises that are looking at this ecosystem. And I would encourage Canadians to also think of themselves as being active participants in there. So if there are concerns from various communities or individuals about information that is perceived to be disinformation, we encourage you to go to the Democratic Institution's website, look at the tools there that are prepared to help you engage with that information.
You know, it's actually rather embarrassing to see government officials who are a part of these task forces giving public presentations reminding people to look into things and do their research on official government websites. I mean, I guess there goes all of those smear campaigns about conservatives cutting healthcare and conservatives banning abortion. Oh my gosh. Oh, what about Pierre's security clearance? We're going to get into that a little bit deeper because, I got some thoughts on that one today. But this is actually the same task force from a press conference that they had a couple weeks back, directly responding to how ludicrous it is for people to demand that in order for misinformation and disinformation to not be a threat anymore, which is never going to happen, by the way, all they have to do is ban X, because X and Elon Musk, oh my gosh, they're just these radical extremists for sharing things that we don't hear on mainstream media. It must be false what they're sharing.
Elon Musk, owner and ally of Donald Trump. Have you already found proof that there is interference from him? And what is your message for social media owners generally? Mr. Musk or anyone else working under him does not fall into the category of foreign interference?
Your example is a very timely one. Obviously, Mr. Musk has considerable following not just in Canada, but throughout the world. It's an expression of his personal opinion. It's definitely not clandestine. It's very public by its very nature. And, Canadians will have an opportunity to judge his or anyone else's opinions as expressed throughout the election campaign. And so our trust is with Canadians that they can separate what is truthful and what may not be truthful and what should be listened to and what should be ignored.
At what point, honestly, is something so blatantly obvious that you actually open your eyes, no matter who you side with politically? Something is there and it is so clear that you actually say, I like this party a lot for whatever reason, but what they're doing is wrong and we should have higher standards than that. That doesn't mean that I like the other party that I don't like, but I can at least acknowledge that this isn't okay. Because the hypocrisy here, with honestly so much about this Liberal campaign, now that I think about it, is so outrageous and frustrating that you almost can do nothing but just laugh at it.
So simply not actually having a real economic message at this point. Like, I do think there's still time for voters to still decide, but I think a lot of conservative leaning voters who wanted to vote them were voting sort of in an anti-Trudeau manner. And I think what we're seeing is sort of there's actually a better option out there for me, that I can actually go back to someone who has an experience with this issue of the economic crisis, who gets it, who's measured, and could probably deal with the crisis that we're dealing with. And I think that's why you're seeing sort of opinion polling kind of going that way out of it, which is fundamentally the biggest one. So after that, it'll be important for Liberals to maintain that momentum with good policies that target the secondary and tertiary areas that matter to Canadians, which, Anthony has mentioned as well for what the Conservatives are focusing on.
First of all, I just want to say I find it funny hearing Liberals say that Mr. Poilievre has nothing to say on the economy, when if you'd like to see what he has to say, you can look at the first half of Mark Carney's announcement so far.
Does anybody else think it's just kind of weird how there's this guy who didn't live in the country for about a decade or so, doesn't invest in the country either, a guy who all of a sudden decides to run for leadership in a country he didn't live in, where most Canadians didn't know who he was actually, according to polling that was done prior to the Liberal leadership race being called. And then suddenly he's running and he gets like 80 to 90% of the vote in every single riding. Then he bans media from his campaign. He's really rude and cruel to journalists when they do try to ask him questions. And then eventually he gets tired of talking to those peasants.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary.
OK, tôt. Ça suffit, hein?
Point final.
As it faces not just a trade war, you say you were enthusiastic.
I'll take that as a no then.
No, you'll take that as a very comprehensive answer to your question. Are you the last local person? Can we? Okay, I feel that, yeah.
So he ends up just banning them from any local events. Local news media, even legacy outlets as well, are not allowed to be at any of the few events that he has announced, as you can clearly see here by his schedule. And then he doesn't really campaign at all. He doesn't present any policies at all, except for this one, to add a new bureaucratic portion of the government that is now going to be in charge of building modular housing similar to Soviet Union era housing.
We used to build things in this country. After the Second World War, Canada faced a housing crisis. The government built prefabricated homes that were easy to assemble and inexpensive. And those homes are still here 80 years later. Now we're in another housing crisis. And it's time your government got back into the business of building affordable homes. We will build new homes for Canadians at a pace not seen since the Second World War. We'll build a Canada you can afford.
And somehow that guy is leading in the polls right now for offering to build us homes that Canadians needed after the World War. The thing about this that's rather frustrating is that this is symptom versus cause thinking. So sure, this sounds a lot like a solution. However, this raises absolutely huge questions about globalist planning, for one, government overreach, and it does not address the cause, which is mass immigration. In 2023 alone, we brought in 1.2 million people. And of course, the housing market did not keep up with that whatsoever. And why did they have so many people coming into the country? Well, all the data I've seen points me to the federal government wanting to temporarily spike the debt to GDP ratio so that they would look good on their annual reports and they'd be able to brag about that and make people think that not only are they the party of compassion and virtue, but that they're also doing really good. Canada is the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Remember when that was commonly thrown around? Not to mention the insane level of zoning and red tape and bureaucracy that makes it impossible to get anything done in this country. It literally takes years to get permits and approvals for a new build. And this comes from all forms of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. It all comes from the top at the end of the day, though. And everybody is bogged down by all of the federal regulations. So that means that developers end up getting blocked, they end up getting delayed, and guess what? They end up not investing in Canada. Or by the time that they do, because, as years go by, things cost more, and the project you wanted to build 5 years ago is going to cost a lot more today than it was projected to 5 years ago. We also have massive problems with government spending and inflation. All of those things make home ownership, or literally just surviving, very, very difficult. The cost of borrowing alone is crushing people. So it seems pretty weird to me to have Carney, who just hired Wiseman as his advisor, the guy behind the Century Initiative, where their goal is to increase the Canadian population by over 100 million before the end of this century, with absolutely no plan on how to go about doing that. But they say it'll be really good for the economy. Well, the facts are here, and it turns out it's actually really bad for the economy when you just flood your country with people for no reason other than the fact that you can and you want to. And then Mark Carney hires Wiseman to advise him. So you would have to assume that they are on a similar page when it comes to immigration, which may be the very reason why Mark Carney has yet to address anything at all about immigration, by the way. So this modular housing plan doesn't make sense on paper. Maybe. But, let's stay close to the red flags of this as well. Why on earth would a global central banker tied to the World Economic Forum be calling for a new bureaucracy to create and mass produce homes? That to me sounds like some more centralized top-down control. It sounds like some mass urban planning. It also sounds like another massive distraction from what the actual root of the problem is, which is affordability, red tape, mass immigration, and bureaucracy that take forever to get things done. So you mean to tell me that you're going to add yet another layer to that and it's going to be faster? Yeah, I don't think that's how that works, buddy. And again, it just seems so weird to me to have the same government that broke our housing market to now suddenly say we're going to mass produce homes. I don't think you will, actually.
President Trump has said he wants the Liberals back in power. We know why, because they will keep Canada weak and keep our investment flowing out of this country to the U.S. After the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling Canadian economy under the American thumb, we cannot allow the Liberals a fourth term in office. We need a change.
But no, a change is not coming, and that could not be more evidently clear. The hypocrisy here is truly so frustrating because the only thing I ask you to think about is, could you imagine how different this would be if it was a conservative who had done this to a liberal?
Paul Chang, one of your candidates in Markham, talked about turning over a conservative candidate to the Chinese consulate to receive a bounty placed on him by the Chinese Communist Party. Can you explain why you've not dropped him as a liberal candidate?
Thank you for the question. Look, the comments were deeply offensive. This is a terrible lapse of judgment by Mr. Chang. He has apologized for those comments. He has apologized directly now to the person that he mentioned. Apologized directly to him yesterday. I've spoken to Mr. Chang as well over the course of the weekend to understand his position. He is a veteran policeman. Mr. Chang is a veteran policeman with more than a quarter century of service to his community. 28 years of defending rights in this community, and he will continue with his candidacy going forward, having made those apologies very clearly to the individual, to the community, and moving forward to serve.
So let's just get all the details straight here. A sitting Liberal MP, Paul Chang, stood in front of a Chinese language media outlet in January and said that somebody needs to kidnap Joe Tay, who is a conservative candidate, a Canadian citizen, and deliver him to the Chinese consulate where they could claim a $1 million bounty. Just going to throw this out there. If you've never watched the Jamal Khashoggi movie, which is all about what happened to him in some kind of similar circumstances, be sure to add The Dissident to your watch list because wowza, is that ever something.
One of the many strengths of China is their perspective, their medium long-term perspective. This is an ambitious G20. It's an ambitious Chinese leadership.
And by the way, Joe Tay is on a real bounty list, which was issued by the Hong Kong police for supporting democracy and speaking out against tyranny. And you have a Liberal MP who says you should bring him to the Chinese consulate. What was the response from Carney? No RCMP probe. There was no suspension. He's still a Liberal MP in good standing.
He is keeping on a Liberal candidate who said that people should turn over the Conservative candidate to a bounty by the Chinese government, which wants to kill him. The Chinese government wants to literally kill Joe Tay because he's a political dissident. And this candidate said that that should happen. Mark Carney keeps that candidate on his roster to be in Parliament. It shows that Carney is more interested in pleasing Beijing because they lent him $250 million for his company. He is compromised. I have never in my life seen a prime minister unwilling to protect a Canadian citizen against a foreign government that wants to take his life through a bounty.
Because despite these words, he was a police officer and he apologized.
Yes, he must be disqualified. I find it incredible that Mark Carney would allow someone to run for his party that called for a Canadian citizen to be handed over to a foreign government on a bounty, a foreign government that would almost certainly execute that Canadian citizen. Think about that for a second. We have a Liberal MP saying that a Canadian citizen should be handed over to a foreign dictatorship to get a bounty so that that citizen could be, and Mark Carney says he should stay on as a candidate. What does that say about whether Mark Carney would protect Canadians? Mark Carney is deeply conflicted. Just in November, he went to Beijing and secured a $250 million loan for his company from a state-owned Chinese bank. He's deeply compromised, and he will never stand up for Canada against any foreign regime. Is another reason why Mr. Carney must show us all his assets, all the money he owes, all the money that his companies owe to foreign hostile regimes.
This really does just go to signal to you exactly the same policies that the Liberal government has advocated for. Number one, it's that there is literally no punishment for things that are really bad. There is no consequences for ethical breaches. There is no consequences for absolutely vile things. There is no consequences, no accountability. And no matter what, doesn't matter who you are, if you are affiliated with that party and you do something terrible, they will make sure that you're okay. I mean, look at even the other Randy Boissonneau, made a comeback, shockingly, despite all of his allegations, despite how much the public resents him. Doesn't matter what you, the people, think. The only thing that matters is that the Liberal Party, the establishment elites, get exactly what they want, and they will manipulate you no matter what.
The question that people from Hong Kong have asked me to ask is whether or not you are putting appeal to those voters who may support the policies of China ahead of the democratic rights and safety of dissidents who have called Canada home, and mainly Hong Kong democracy activists who now live in Mr. Chang's riding.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Stand foursquare for rights, foursquare for our position, our very strong position vis-a-vis China, respect for Canadian citizens, all rights of Canadian citizens, irrespective of whether they hold dual citizenship or not, to be absolutely clear. And Mr. Chang has long history of service to that community, history of protecting those rights. Mr. Chang is well aware of these issues, including having family in Hong Kong.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized for he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy.
I also think it's rather important to note that according to this article published by Sam Cooper, Beijing's 2021 interference was worst in Chang's riding. So the fact that Mark Carney and all of them want to press so hard about Pierre Poilievre and his security clearance, why do they do that? Because it's a distraction. Poilievre wouldn't be able to say the things that he is right now if he had that security clearance. That would be awful. He would be playing into their game. And again, the clearance isn't mandatory, right? So it's optional, and you're pressing him because he didn't get something that's optional, which would prevent him from being able to openly speak about these things like he has been doing. Sounds like a trap to me. Mark Carney has been completely silent on the 100% tariffs from China. That is absolutely devastating to the farming community, by the way. And he is also absolutely silent here and says no matter what, he's keeping Chang on, despite all of this. What is wrong with you? And you want to sit there and point the finger at Pierre Poilievre because you didn't get a security clearance. Shut up, actually. And I don't say that to a lot of people, but please, Mr. Carney, Liberal supporters, shut up and realize what is happening around you and who these people are most likely actually affiliated with and whose interests they serve. They want to push you away from the U.S. Why would they want to do that unless it was to push us closer to, I don't know, perhaps China, maybe? I don't know. You can speculate on your own. If this story gets enough ears, I think it very well could be what loses Mark Carney the election, especially him doing everything in his power. Oh, he was a police officer, so that means that, he served the community well. Clearly, he was a real bad cop, buddy. Clearly, he's a man who knows the law. Yeah, he failed, right? And you think he's going to be successful at serving the community despite issuing threats and trying to intimidate people in the community who are dissident from the China regime. Good luck. Good luck with that one. Obviously, this is a developing story. I would be really shocked, but not surprised, if Mark Carney refuses to remove Chang. And I think that if he does, your answer is right there, clear as day, in terms of the global elite WEF takeover that is happening in this country. There is no clearer answer if everything else that has transpired wasn't already clear enough for you.
The anti-U.S. rhetoric is being stirred up by Carney because his party
that's right.
devastated the country over the last 10 years. And the only way he can stay in power is to convince people he's the solution against Trump. So the rhetoric has never been hotter. And of course, he's 5 weeks away from an election. So he'll stir the pot any way he can. But let's not forget where Carney came from. He is a global elitist. He's a supporter of carbon taxes. He said he'll remove them from consumers, but he's going to double down on business in Canada. And that decimated. You got to remember, Canada actually only grew under the Liberal Party 1.4% in 10 years. The economy's been wiped out. One of the reasons Canadians can't go to Florida is his party wiped out the value of the dollar, down 41%. Canadians can't afford to go to Disneyland anymore. So Carney's doing it the very best he can to say, look, I will save you against Trump. And he throws the rhetoric out every day against him, a man named Pierre Poilievre, who's also trying to be elected as a conservative. They're both in a crazy rhetoric, an anti-American rhetoric, that will go away the minute this election's over. He will get on a plane, whoever wins, fly to Washington, and start working on what I call NAFTA 3.
I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Give us a follow on other social media platforms, wherever it is that you're listening to this. The show is also now available on Apple and Spotify. I'm working on Amazon, but I'm having some difficulties in waiting on their support team to get back to me. We'll see how long that takes. Be sure to like the video as well. That helps more people see this content. And comment your thoughts down below. A heads up, by the way, I have a very spicy interview. I shouldn't say interview, more of a conversation with a wonderful lady named Kelsey Sharon, who you may be familiar with. She's been on Trigonometry. She's also been on Jordan Peterson, the Jocko podcast, a whole bunch of big ones like that. And she is an absolute Canadian patriot who knows what she is talking about. We both got pretty heated at various points. There are expletives, curse words used, but it really was just more of a casual conversation and frustration that we're both feeling right now in Canada. So I hope you enjoy that episode. That's going to be dropping tomorrow morning at about 6 a.m. Central Time. Let me know what you think about it, and I will be back with you with a regular episode and more details about everything happening with the Chang story. I'm sure it'll be even bigger tomorrow than it was today. So I'll talk to you tomorrow.
I said this on Jordan Peterson, and he was in full agreement. The hard reality is, in the most recent times, eugenics existed. We have to pay attention to history for a reason, or we are bound to repeat it, and we are repeating it.